A man went to an office building looking for a job. The boss told him that everyone in the company had high academic qualifications. No matter how much experience he had, it was impossible to hire him. This was the first time old Leung had spoken with a boss in the several months since he arrived in Hong Kong. He didn't want to give up, but he quickly annoyed the boss, who even wanted to call security to escort him out. Yet old Leung stubbornly refused to leave. At that moment, the company manager noticed him because of his accent. He thought this young man could be very useful. A few days later, the manager was negotiating a land deal with a buyer. In the middle of the discussion, a luxury car arrived, and a rich young man stepped out. In reality, the manager had discovered that old Leung had thick skin and a Southeast Asian appearance, so he asked him to impersonate a Southeast Asian tycoon to drive up the land price. The buyer was also an experienced operator and could not be fooled so easily. He waved his hand and left. Watching them depart, old Leung thought he had failed quickly. The manager then came over and, upon hearing the bad news, took out a $100 bill as payment. Old Leung accepted it and thanked him repeatedly. This was the first $100 he had earned since coming to Hong Kong, but given his performance that day, he thought it would be his last. However, on the way back by car, old Leung noticed that the buyer's car had stopped halfway. The buyer even greeted him. What was even stranger was that after they left again, the buyer started following closely behind them. Was he trying to test his identity? Looking at the $100 bill in his hand, old Leung decided to go all in. He instructed the driver to take him to a luxurious hotel. As expected, the buyer followed. Once seated, he handed the waiter a $100 tip. At that moment, the buyer walked over. Seeing old Leung spending so generously, the buyer began addressing him respectfully as Big Brother. This was the first time old Leung experienced the pleasure of pretending to be rich. The buyer had been following him because he was curious why old Leung would offer such a high price for a piece of land that had no water or electricity. Old Leung did not answer directly. Instead, he calmly lit a cigar, took a deep puff, and remained mysterious. Mystery is often the most deadly weapon. The buyer began to suspect that old Leung had insider information and that the government was planning to develop the area. Seeing his ambiguous attitude, the buyer's suspicions grew heavier. Watching others make money is often more painful than making it yourself. Observing that the buyer was now interested in the land, old Leung knew his goal had been achieved. That night, he returned to his tiny cubicle of less than 1 square meter. Even in such a place, he was still behind on a month's rent. Unexpectedly, the manager came looking for him. Seeing old Leung lying in the cramped space, the manager did not look down on him. Instead, he smiled warmly. It turned out that old Leung's bluff had succeeded. The manager had sold the land at a huge profit. A talent like this was rare. The manager began to recruit him to work for him. Ordinary people usually only get one chance to turn their lives around. Old Leung decided to seize it firmly. With his thick skin and clever mind, he soon opened his own travel company. His flexible personality allowed him to build connections in Southeast Asia through rich women. With the support of wealthy backers, he began acquiring bankrupt listed companies. He brought in famous investors to create hype and drive up the stock price. The soaring stock price allowed him to continuously take out loans from banks and the government. Although there were suspicions of fraud, any problem that couldn't be solved with bribes was handled with the money he brought in. He spent wildly on real estate and luxury. However, the company was never truly profitable. When the wealthy backers began cashing out aggressively, the shareholders' money was completely wiped out. He immediately became the focus of investigation. The person in charge of investigating him was old Lin. Even though the investigation team had more than 110 people and litigation costs reached 200 million, they still couldn't do anything to him. This was not because he could cover the sky with one hand, but because the powerful backers he colluded with were protecting him. Others who knew the secrets were not so lucky. In just over a month, those who tried to sell out for rewards were dealt with. In the end, after committing so many crimes, he was only sentenced to 3 years in prison, and this was after he voluntarily surrendered. The timing of his surrender was also very clever. It happened exactly 1 year before Hong Kong's handover. The backers knew that protecting old Leung meant protecting themselves. But when interests blind people's eyes, when the protection of power exceeds the bottom line of justice, and when the people's hard-earned money flows into criminal capital, society is no longer fair or transparent. Such behavior is not impossible even today. We can still learn from history, see the dangers in the dawn, and avoid becoming the next invisible victims.